MPs, peers, councillors who are able to join us, but also everybody else, of course. The Kaleidoscope Trust has been formally in existence for only 8 months. Since our launch last September, we've made remarkable progress as an organisation and now as a registered charity. The backing we've received from all political parties in Britain has been enormously valuable. But it's the support of many thousands of ordinary individuals here and around the world that is most heartening. It shows that while we're able to enjoy something close to full equality, we don't forget that in so much of the world, just to talk openly about your sexuality is to invite at best exclusion from your family, your community, and your friends, and at worst, physical attack, arrest, imprisonment, and even, in extreme circumstances, death. The Kaleidoscope Trust is the only UK charity to focus exclusively on LGBT rights around the world, and we've established very good links with activists and groups on every continent, and we look forward to building on those in the year ahead. They all tell us that the biggest challenge they face is to change attitudes and beliefs, not just laws. And that can only be done through dialogue, discussion, and argument. Nobody ever changed their opinion about anything because they were told to do so. And that's especially true of homosexuality, where deep historical and cultural reasons lie behind the views that so many people hold. International Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Transgender and Intersex Association, you can see why we just call ourselves Kaleidoscope, shows that the number of places where homosexual acts are illegal has gone up in the past year from 76 to 78. Now at Kaleidoscope we pride ourselves on not underestimating but not exaggerating the situation, so I should point out that that's not because it's illegal now anywhere where it wasn't illegal before, but because Sudan is now 2 countries instead of 1, and in Benin in West Africa they've clarified their laws, but the figure is now 78 countries around the world, and to my mind that's an awful lot, and of course it's far, far too many. Our work in countries like those we call the Think Again campaign, and with its director, Bisi Alimi, I've just returned from Kenya and from Ghana, 2 very different countries, both former British colonies and members of the Commonwealth, with laws still on their statute books that are a legacy of that colonial period. In Ghana, the leader of the largest LGBT group there has just moved his home away from the capital Accra because of the abuse and harassment he was receiving from his neighbours and from the community. He now drives 2 hours each way every day just so that he can sleep peacefully at night. In Kenya, where it's somewhat easier to be openly gay, being officially recognised as an LGBT organisation is still very difficult. We met one group from the west of the country who had their application to register under the law turned down time and again until they changed their name to Let Good Be Told in Us. Apparently the authorities didn't notice that we still managed to get LGBTI into the name of the organisation. We also met a very brave young man called David Courier, who's considering running for the Kenyan Senate in next year's elections. And if he does, he'll be the first openly gay black man in Africa to run for public office. And today we're launching a new programme, the Kaleidoscope Leadership Forum, to provide support for people like David. And we're very grateful to the David Cairns Trust here in Britain for supporting that forum. David Cairns MP was a very fine parliamentarian until his untimely death just over a year ago. And the values that we hold dear was something that was very close to his heart. We're also grateful to our sponsors tonight, Ernst & Young, and to Evgeny Lebedev of The Independent. But it's now time to introduce our very special guest, the Speaker of the House of Commons, John Bercow. We ask people to think again, and I guess it's fair to say that John has done a bit of mental revisioning since deciding to enter politics. But he's very much in the right place now, and that place includes being president of the Kaleidoscope Trust. We're very lucky to have him, and I'd ask you to welcome the Right Honourable John Bercow, MP.
Lance, thank you for the warmth and generosity of that introduction. It is, for me, an enormous pleasure to be here to address such a distinguished audience. In reiterating the thanks that you have expressed to everybody who has turned up and our particular appreciation of the sponsors, I should at the outset At the risk of it being invidious, I know, because there will doubtless be others present whom I'm also delighted to see from Parliament, Baroness Barker and a number of other colleagues. There's one person I wish in particular to welcome, and that is the Equalities Minister, Lynn Featherstone, because Lynn, since she came into the House of Commons in 2005, has been a passionate champion and an outspoken and articulate champion of LGBT rights and indeed of equality more widely, and it must be a great source of pride and satisfaction to her now to have the opportunity to translate her long-held beliefs from ambitions to execution. Having the opportunity to speak to a diverse range of organisations is one of the delights of the office which I'm privileged to hold. As Speaker, I must remain impartial in the chair and indeed on any legislation that comes before Parliament, which means that I am unable to make speeches or to vote unless there is a tie. That said, I thought it reasonable to offer you some notion of my credentials on these matters. Before I became Speaker, I voted in 2000 for the equalisation of the age of consent, in 2002 for the right of gay couples jointly to adopt children, in 2003 for the repeal of Section 28, in 2004 for the civil partnership legislation, and for the Equality Acts of 2005 and 2009. The Kaleidoscope Trust, with its focus away from these shores, has helpfully enabled me to continue my advocacy of and support for LGBT rights without compromising my domestic impartiality. I'm tremendously proud to be associated with the Kaleidoscope Trust. It is, ladies and gentlemen, to the enduring credit of Lance Price that he had the vision to see the need for the Trust and the drive with a team of dedicated colleagues to establish it within months as a strong voice on LGBT issues. Its values and its virtues will be vindicated time and again in the months and years ahead. I want to use this platform tonight to stress the international character of the struggle for true equality and human rights in which we are engaged, to reflect upon the progress we are making, to flag up the challenges we have yet to overcome, which we will, and to highlight the special significance of the work of this trust. This is an especially appropriate time for such a tour d'horizon in a year when international attention will be directed at this country, and we have the chance to show our commitment and our leadership in this field. My focus this evening, however, will be on developments across the planet rather than at home. There have been numerous positive deeds which I would like to set out for you before, inevitably, if somewhat unfortunately, I have to report far less welcome activities. I hope you will forgive me, colleagues, if these observations are comprehensive in nature, but I think it is valuable for us all to register and to reflect upon what might be described as the good, the bad, and the ugly. I want to start with the United Nations. In December 2011, at the United Nations in Geneva, to mark International Human Rights Day, US Secretary of State Hillary Clinton made a landmark and inspiring speech. Indeed, I should go so far as to say, having read it more than once, as inspiring and eloquently crafted a speech as I've had the good fortune to study in many a long year. As she eloquently stated in that speech, some have suggested that gay rights and human rights are separate and distinct, but in fact, they are one and the same. Like being a woman, like being a racial, religious, tribal, or ethnic minority, being LGBT does not make you less human. And that is why gay rights are human rights, and human rights are gay rights. There then followed in March 2012 the first ever UN plenary session on LGBT human rights, sexual orientation and gender identification, and this took place in Geneva. Despite opposition from some quarters, the UN Human Rights Council panel reaffirmed its commitment to fighting discrimination and the persecution of LGBT people, sending a strong signal to countries still criminalising homosexuality. The debate affirmed that states have a duty under international law to protect the human rights of all persons. It was truly, ladies and gentlemen, a defining moment. Europe has, I'm pleased to say, moved in lockstep with the United Nations. The Council of Europe has held its first ever conference on the status of LGBT rights among its members. The UK government declared that it would fund a lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender unit which would oversee the implementation of the Council's recommendations. This trust was present at the conference. In Latin America, the Inter-American Human Rights Court has decided in favour of a Chilean woman who had lost custody of her children due to her sexuality. This is a historic ruling for the region because it clarified for the first time that sexual orientation and gender identity are categories protected against discrimination under the 1969 American Convention on Human Rights. It signalled an increasing acceptance globally that whether or not a parent is gay is utterly irrelevant in determining the best interests of a child. The brief also argued that denying lesbian and gay people custody of their children violates the rights of both children and parents to live freely without discrimination. In the same country, the homophobic murder of Daniel Zamudio in Santiago sparked calls for the Chilean government to introduce anti-discrimination and hate crimes legislation. The Chilean Congress has approved an anti-discrimination bill that outlaws discrimination on the grounds of race, religion, gender, and/or sexual orientation. The bill had languished in Congress for over 7 years, but was finally fast-tracked to approval by the President, Sebastián Piñera, and it cleared its final hurdle with a 25-3 vote in the Senate only last week, to be precise, on the 10th of May. In Australia, a Senate inquiry into legalising gay marriage in that nation has revealed unprecedented support for the change. Figures released last month showed a leap in support for gay marriage, with almost 6 in 10 Australians wanting to allow same-sex couples to marry, a stand backed in an open letter signed by more than 50 members of the clergy. My final 2 examples of the past 6 months carry in what would traditionally be regarded as extremely difficult territory for the advocates of equality. The first concerns Jamaica. The Prime Minister there, Portia Simpson Miller, took on conventional political wisdom about what could be said and done amongst her electorate by stating that she would review the criminalisation of homosexuality in the country and would not forbid lesbian or gay people from serving in her cabinet. This was remarkable in the context of a close political contest in which the incentives to play safe would have been considerable. If her words can be translated into deeds, then the impact in this region in the pursuit of true equality could be really seismic. The second relates to Uganda. In a groundbreaking move, Ugandan gay rights group SMUG filed a lawsuit against marriage law by inciting the persecution of gay men and lesbians in their country. The Centre for Constitutional Rights took on Lively, who rejoices in the title of President of the Abiding Truth Ministries, on behalf of LGBT activist Frank Mugisha from Sexual Minorities Uganda, a non-profit umbrella body for LGBT advocacy organisations in that country. The suit alleges that Lively's involvement is openly whipping up anti-gay hysteria in Uganda, including his active participation in the formulation of anti-gay legislation and policies aimed at revoking fundamental rights from LGBT people. The argument is that his position constitutes persecution. This is the first known alien tort statute case seeking accountability for persecution on the basis of sexual orientation and gender. Its implications may be seminal. If all of this is cause for cheer, which it is, I also need, sadly, to set out the causes for concern. Before I do, however, I think that this is an appropriate time at which to remind ourselves what it is we are actually talking about here. Prejudice, intolerance, and persecution on the basis of sexuality are a denial of humanity. Such treatment is sentencing people to a life of fear, self-doubt, and self-loathing. It is the theft of one of our most fundamental instincts, to love and to be loved. This issue is so much more than politics or diplomacy. It is about the subjugation of a fellow human being's freedom. It is painful, it is demeaning, it is dehumanizing. The examples which follow are not dry facts or cold entries in an index of injustice. They are human hurts which strike at the very being of millions of our fellow citizens across the world. At the most basic level, it still remains illegal to engage in same-sex conduct in no fewer than 78 countries. In 5 nations, Iran, Mauritania, Saudi Arabia, Sudan, and Yemen, the death penalty can be invoked for homosexual activity. And examples of hostile legislative activity are by no means confined to what might be called the usual suspects. In Russia, for instance, the St. Petersburg City Assembly passed the controversial Homosexual Propaganda Law, which came into effect in March. The bill effectively bans public events by LGBT people and organisations acting on their behalf under the pretext of protecting minors. Fines can be imposed on individuals and institutions for, and I quote, public actions aimed at propaganda of sodomy, lesbianism, bisexuality and transgenderism among minors, unquote. Needless to say, colleagues, the definition of all this lies very much in the hands of the would-be prosecutor. Local LGBT rights advocates have assailed the legislation, arguing that it will provide legal cover for banning almost anything. Russian activists have pressed for a travel ban on those responsible for the propagation of this intolerant set of proposals. These are not the only alarming signs from within our own continent. With St. Petersburg as the clear inspiration, an extremist party in Hungary has sought to ban television programmes that portray being gay as acceptable. The proposal would make such so-called promotion of homosexuality, and I emphasise so-called promotion of homosexuality, punishable by up to 8 years imprisonment. In parallel, the Budapest police had rejected a request to hold the annual LGBT Pride March there this summer. A court in Budapest reportedly overruled the police's decision not to grant a licence in April. It appears that Budapest should now be able to host a pride parade this year, but how the police will react if it does go ahead is another question. Meanwhile, in Slovenia, citizens voted to reject a law that would have allowed gay couples to adopt the biological children of their parents. This is, frankly, a surprising setback, as this is a country in which homosexuality has been comparatively uncontroversial, with a form of civil partnership registration in place for some 6 years now. These negative developments, themselves disturbing enough, are compounded and outdone by evidence of legislative and judicial reaction elsewhere. In Nigeria, the same-gender marriage prohibition bill was proposed in 2011 and has since been amended by the Nigerian Senate to punish those in a same-sex union with 14 years imprisonment and anyone aiding and abetting such unions with 10 years the European Parliament has called on the Nigerian Parliament to throw out the bill, which, if enacted, would put LGBT people at serious risk of violence and arrest. Existing legislation already punishes homosexual acts with up to 14 years imprisonment or, unofficially, death by stoning in certain northern regions. This campaign has echoes of what has been seen and heard more vividly, as I referred to earlier, in Uganda. The backbench bill, which had included the death penalty for some offences, in inverted commas, of homosexuality, has been reintroduced in Parliament. Although the death penalty clause has now been dropped, it remains a pernicious piece of legislation that would introduce the penalty of life imprisonment for a person convicted of a gay act more than once. Another proposal from 2010 that blocks gay people from access to HIV prevention and treatment has also resurfaced in Kampala. These are very testing times. Finally, in Malaysia, activists seeking to reverse the ban on the Sexual Rights Festival failed in their court action. In a state-inspired homophobic innovation, the Malaysian Information Department has sparked additional controversy by announcing an intention to ban television shows which feature gay characters. Colleagues, exactly how this will be determined is a mystery, but this is an unapologetic attempt to curb the so-called influence of LGBT activists in Malaysia. What can we learn from this evidence, both positive and negative? Quite a lot, in my opinion. The first lesson is the exceptional geographical diversity in both directions. It is not simply a case of large sections of the world being sympathetic to the equality agenda and comparably large and predictable segments of the planet being antipathetic to similar initiatives. It is a much, much, much more complicated and nuanced picture than that. As I have outlined, Jamaica, which has not been easy terrain for LGBT supporters, has found itself with a bold advocate for change, while countries within the heart of the European Union and the Council of Europe contain reactionary elements. At a minimum, the events of the past few months illustrate the importance of acquiring detailed information internally, even from locations that one might assume did not need observation. I am pleased that this remains at the core of the Trust's mission. It must not be forgotten, but rather followed for the foreseeable future. The second element worthy of note is the uncertain relationship between democracy and full equality. While, as a broad rule, countries which hold free elections and which respect the rule of law are more likely to take a consistent and full approach to human rights than is seen in dictatorships, it is not regrettably as simple as saying that equality follows democracy as day follows night. There are a number of nations which hold what are correctly considered to be free and fair elections on a regular basis, but which are frankly not free and fair societies as far as their LGBT citizens are concerned. Cultural alignment matters at least as much as constitutional arrangements, and culture, as indicated in the opening remarks by Lance, is much harder to change than our constitutions. We need to be aware of this in all of our activities. We meet here tonight in the Commonwealth Club. The Commonwealth is a most valuable asset in today's world. It is described as a voluntary association of sovereign states consulting and cooperating in the common interests of their peoples and in the promotion of international understanding and world peace. But worryingly, 41 of the 78 countries where same-sex activity is illegal are Commonwealth countries. This is clearly a violation of the rights of their citizens, and as the Commonwealth Secretary-General Kamala Sharma said in July last year, and I quote, "The vilification and targeting of people on grounds of sexual orientation are at odds with the values of the Commonwealth," unquote.
The framework of engagement amongst Commonwealth nations provides us with a great opportunity to work with those 41 countries with such unjust legislative prohibitions on homosexuality. The Commonwealth is often called a family, and we all know that families have different views and sometimes fall out. But the strength of families is that there is a strong base upon which to settle our differences. Let's use it. Finally, I think what I have described so far highlights the importance of individual and institutional leadership and the pivotal part played by personal determination and, to an extent, personal sacrifice. This is not a cause that can rely on some irresistible tide of history to secure its ends. It will not happen automatically. It requires people willing to bear the burden of being activists. And those activists, ladies and gentlemen, require resources and our backing. All of which brings me logically to the Kaleidoscope Leadership Forum and what it can achieve in future. The forum is designed primarily as an on-quarters of LGBT rights in public life. In addition to providing online advice and a space for exchanging ideas and best practice, the Leadership Forum will be a gateway to practical support, including media training, lectures, and reciprocal visits. One of the key objectives of the forum is to encourage the emerging new cadre of leaders to examine how best they could advance the cause of diversity and respect for LGBT rights in their future careers. The forum will build up an online library of resources, including model press releases, letters, research materials, speeches, and so forth. It would incorporate videos or links to YouTube with first-person contributions from around the world sharing advice and best practice, for example, on connecting with the media, public speaking, or engaging with policymakers. Technology can be our precious friend. Forum leaders would be people who already hold high-profile leadership positions. This can be built upon so that each month one of the leaders delivers an extended forum lecture on his or her chosen topic. The forum is open to anybody to take part, no matter in which country they live. It will aim to offer advice and experience from openly gay elected representatives. Many of these will come from long-established democracies, but there will be exceptions, such as Sunil Pant in Nepal or David Courier in Kenya. Those aspiring to or thinking about leadership positions can register online. The Leadership Forum will have, therefore, a distinct and quantifiable membership. The forum is about people aspiring to leadership positions in government, local politics, the civil service, and the media. It is not about indoctrination or training people to be LGBT activists. The programme does not yet have any course that people can join, and there are no plans to recognise achievement as such. It aims to be less an exercise in formal distance learning and more an informal but effective global exchange of expertise and experience. It will, for example, aim to stage leadership academies at least once or twice a year, subject to securing adequate funding and sponsorship. A convenient point at which, Lance, I think, for me to underline our extreme gratitude to our sponsors, our reminder to them of how magnificently they've behaved, and what great rewards of appreciation await them for their continued, possibly even enhanced support. It should be an objective to identify key up-and-coming individuals who would be asked to attend and to lead an academy session. These might be held in different cities and continents to ensure that the initiative is truly international and able to facilitate the transfer of knowledge and skills throughout the world. I endorsed it wholeheartedly. As I have mentioned previously, the eyes of the world will be focused upon Britain this year with an unusual intensity. Alongside the Diamond Jubilee and the Olympic Games, world pride will descend upon our capital city. The Kaleidoscope Trust has been selected as the official charity partner for Pride London, who will host World Pride this year. Again, at the risk of embarrassing Lance, I must say I do think that this is a quite remarkable achievement on the part of an organisation which, notwithstanding the fact of its international motivation and raison d'etre, has been in existence for only 8 months. I think it is a huge tribute, Lance, to you and your team. The theme of the 2012 Pride events, which run from June the 23rd to July the 8th, is the international decriminalisation of homosexuality. World Pride's stated ambition is to raise awareness of those suffering persecution because of their sexuality. As a consequence, people will be coming from all over the world to London, including, ladies and gentlemen, some very brave local activists. Let's think about this not from our vantage point of security and safety to speak out, but from theirs, usually in the absence of such security and safety. Those people are taking a huge risk to campaign publicly in countries where their sexuality is still illegal. This trust takes its lead from those, and I use the word advisedly, heroic individuals. We do not pretend to know how best to effect change in their countries, which, as I have said, is often more about cultures than about constitutions. It would be arrogant in the extreme to suggest that there is one single blueprint which all may borrow. The Trust instead asks what it can do to help and shapes its agenda accordingly. Schemes such as the Leadership Forum have evolved as a consequence of that debate, discussion and dialogue. That said, we must never forget that it is individual courage that will ultimately advance this cause. In this respect, I want to say a few words about a person who, tragically, will not be in London this summer. I mentioned him a little earlier, but I want to refer to him once more as I conclude. Daniel Zamudio, aged 24, was an openly gay Chilean man who was tortured and beaten to death by suspected neo-Nazis in his homeland a few months ago. He was finally pronounced dead after 25 days in hospital, following a savage beating by his attackers, who struck him over the head, burnt him with cigarettes, and carved swastikas into his chest. Thousands of complete strangers attended his funeral. Chile has been through a period of very considerable soul-searching as a consequence. Legislation has been introduced which, as I have indicated, may secure its rightful space in the statute book. It should not take an incident such as this to act as a catalyst for change, but history is full of such examples. Tragically, all too often, it is the commission of a terrible human wrong that prompts others to act to protect the human right, which most of us have come to take for granted. This trust exists to support those like Daniel Zamudio and to work for a world in which no one like him has to suffer as he did. It will carry on until we all live in societies where there is absolute and mutual respect for human beings, no matter how they live, how they look, and how they love. I know that everyone in this room is united in commitment to that most noble of objectives. To finish, let me impress upon you that there is no better means to that end than the type of work undertaken and envisaged by the Kaleidoscope Trust. Through education, through campaigning, and through the sheer force of moral suasion, we must strive to deliver equality for LGBT people that others have so long enjoyed and which they have too long been denied. Thank you very much indeed.
John, I think the reaction of the audience says it all, but I'd like to thank you personally for a very thoughtful and from the heart